It's 9:30. I'll call the meeting to order, and the first item of business is adoption of the agenda. Moved by Mitchell, seconded by Finch, that the agenda be adopted as printed and circulated. Are there any issues with the agenda? All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. Are there any declarations of pecuniary interest or the general nature thereof? Not seeing any. Pretend I didn't leave the chair. Minutes. Moved by Finch, seconded by Mitchell, that the minutes from the December 21st, 2022 council meeting be adopted as printed and circulated. Are there any issues with those minutes? All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. And nobody submitted anything for public comment period. We have no public meetings or drainage meetings today. We have two timed items, 9:35 presentation from ERTH Power Corporation and 9:50 presentation from Beachville District Museum. And we're not quite at 9:35 yet, but I think we're probably good to go for that and have Eustacia Young and Chris White come up and begin their presentation to us on ERTH Power. Can somebody just make sure their microphone is on for them before we start?
Members of council, so I've been asked to kind of speak closely. Pretty loud. Usually it's never a problem for me, but I did present we sent a bunch of slides in a couple of weeks ago for you folks to go through and follow through, but I've got a bit of an agenda here. I'm going to be talking a little bit about ERTH Corporation, not just the power company, but the entire corporation as a whole, and just kind of providing a little bit of history on the company for you folks, as Zorra is a shareholder of ERTH Corporation. So we'll flip another slide, pass the agenda, next slide. So this is just our corporate chart here. Quickly, you'll see across the top, we've got 9 municipal shareholders. We're 100% municipally owned, so we've got no third-party equity investors. We're all owned by folks like you. You'll see those shareholders across the top. So over on the left-hand side of that corporate chart is ERTH Power Corporation. That is the regulated utility. That is the company that keeps the lights on in the communities across our service territory. Over on the right-hand side is our competitive businesses that are doing various things in the utility sector. Next slide, please. Just looking at our board structure, we've got essentially 2 operating boards. The corporate board it's a 9-member board. The representatives are appointed by the shareholders. Each shareholder has 1 member on that board. The ERTH Power Board is a 5-member board. It's made up of both members of the corporate board, 2 members there, and 3 independents. Due to the affiliate relationship code from the Ontario Energy Board, there needs to be a level of independence on that board because it is a regulated company. We flip to the next slide. This is just a representation of the shareholder communities that own a stake in ERTH Corporation as a whole. And you'll see on that slide the representatives that represent each of those shareholder communities. For Zorra, we have Matt Langford, who's been a representative for the last 4 years. His initial term is not up until 2025. So the initial term for the board members is a 6-year term, and there's an opportunity to extend it another 3 years. He is the chair of our HR committee as well, and he's been a fantastic board member for your information. Just flipping to the next slide. This is just our executive team. Myself as the CEO. We got Lori Palmer, our Chief Operating Officer. Rob Kent, our Chief Financial Officer. Greg Pettit is the Vice President, General Manager of the utility, ERTH Power. And then Tyler Moore is our VP of ERTH Energy and our General Counsel. And of course, we got Eustacia Young here with us. She's the true boss. She's our Corporate Secretary and our Corporate EA. Going on to the next slide. This is just a little bit of the history of ERTH. So we were formed back in 2000 when the market deregulated, and seven municipal LDCs came together at that point in time back in 2000 because of the challenges of the new marketplace. ERTH again is 100% municipally owned. Since 2000, we've had a couple of other mergers that have taken place. Back in 2010-ish, we had West Perth and Central Huron, which is the town of Clinton, and Mitchell and Dublin. They came into the fold as partners, and then later on in 2019, Goderich merged with us. So we're now a utility that's servicing 15 communities across 4 counties, from the shores of Lake Erie to the shores of Lake Huron, servicing about 25,000 electricity customers and keeping the lights on in those 15 communities. We have offices in Toronto, Ingersoll, Elmer, Goderich, and Thorndale. That's operating both our regulated businesses and our non-regulated businesses where those offices serve. Just to the next slide, please. A little bit of history on the non-regulated side of the business. We service about 200 customers across North America. So these are municipalities, other LDCs, other businesses, primarily in the energy sector. We are a full-service company offering a variety of products and services, specializing in the utility and energy sector. I'm not going to get into too much of all the things that we do on the competitive side because there is a comprehensive list, and it's on another slide down the road, and I'll point to that when we get to that. The next slide, please. Just our mission and vision. So our vision is to work cooperatively as a trusted quality service and solution provider, creating value for all of our stakeholders, including our shareholders. Our mission is to be a community partner committed to delivering safe and reliable electricity while providing innovative and high-quality services and solutions to our customers. And there's our values: safety first, customer focus, excellence, innovation, sustainability, and commitment. The next slide is our corporate strategy document. It's a summary document. You'll look at I'm not going to get into the details of the document, but every year we go through a strategy session with our board of directors. Currently, right now, this document is our strategic document serving us for the next several years, and it's focused on 4 pillars, and that's smart growth, risk management for the corporation, innovation and performance excellence, as well as market reputation. Just to the next slide. In terms of the corporate strategy, we do have a heavily focused efforts in terms of growth, and that's both on the regulated side of the business as well as the competitive side of the business. We are striving to grow the number of customers that we serve through mergers and amalgamations with other like-minded partners. So we continue to look at our next partner. Obviously, we'd have to come to the shareholder for approval on that if we were to get into that position. Obviously, we continue to grow that regulated business through investments, service area amendments, and providing good service to our customers. From the non-regulated side, we've really been doing quite well in this space now, and we're seeing kind of the fruits of our effort over the last 15 to 20 years. But right now, our total business really, from a revenue standpoint, the revenue is almost double on the non-regulated side versus the regulated side. So we're doing quite some really cool and innovative things, and we're seeing a lot of success. So it's a great success story from ERTH's perspective, and hopefully from the shareholders' perspective. Just looking at the next slide, it's a little bit of a signal there to the growth that we've had over the years. Back in 2000, we had 33 employees. Today, we're sitting at about 130 employees across the various businesses. You flip to the next slide there. Again, this is kind of representative of the corporate chart. If you look at the far left, that's really our regulated company, the green block. And then you look at the next 3 blocks there, the gray, the blue, and the red. Those really represent more of a detailed listing of all the competitive services that we're providing in the energy sector as a whole. And our customer base is much broader than the 15 communities that I spoke of at the utility services. We'll flip to the next slide. It's just a snapshot of our business plan. Again, every year we work on our strategy with the board, and we create a business plan that guides us through the next year. And I just want to share with you that that's a formalized process that we go through every year. I'm going to talk a little bit about the regulated company because it's probably one of the ones that serves primary interest probably for this meeting today. The competitive businesses is very complicated. We're having a meeting in March where we're going to invite all the shareholders, so inviting new members of council to kind of learn a little bit more about the businesses and the various business lines that we have. So I'll flip to the next slide. Talk briefly about we've got a separate board for the power, the utility business. Gunners Chexter, he was a former CEO of Hydro EnerSource utility in Toronto. Ron Baldwin's our vice chair. Scott Stahl, he was a regulatory lawyer from Toronto. David Mayberry, most of you folks know him. Paul Madden is a former CEO of 3M Canada. So we've got some pretty talented folks on that board representing some diverse skill sets, which is very important for our business in terms of helping us make the right decisions and helping lead the organization. Just flipping to the next slide. So I talked about the 15 communities across the 4 counties, the 25,000 customers. These are the communities that we service, right from the south, Port Stanley, Elmer, Belmont, and then we got the communities of Norwich, Waterville, Burgessville. And then, of course, from your perspective, we service the communities of Tempsford and Embro. And then you go up to Tavistock, Ingersoll, Dublin, Mitchell, Clinton, and Goderich. So right up to Lake Huron. The next slide. We have a strong social media presence. In 2022, we updated our corporate website. We're planning on updating our Earth Power website this year. We've just started that process now. But we've got Jocelyn Basiato on our team. She does a great job in terms of marketing our business, and we've got a very strong online presence, so I encourage you to follow us. If you flip to the next page, just in terms of Earth Power, late in 2022, we've introduced an outage-facing map for our customers. So if you're following us online, you will see updates to outages. This is not a system that we manage 24/7. We don't have a 24/7 control room at this point in time. We do our best to manage it after hours. And in larger scale outages, we would probably call people in and start to manage obviously the issues that we're dealing with in the field, but also the communications portion with our customers and updating the outage map in a larger scale outage. Just flipping to the next slide, it's just a kind of a snapshot quickly of, we're partners with our communities. We take a lot of pride in that. We're heavily involved in our communities, parades, charity events, so forth. So we really value the partnership that we share with our communities. And much like you folks, we value investment in our communities, so we support that in every way that we can. Just a little bit of a snapshot of rates, just to illustrate that where rates are fairly competitive between our residential and commercial rates. Residential might be slightly higher, but our commercial rates are slightly lower than our neighbors, Tillsonburg and Festival. We like to kind of draw them as comparators just because they're close to us in this region. If you flip to the next slide, that's just an example of some of the work that we're doing in your communities, upgrading the system to ensure safe, reliable power to the customers that we serve. I'll flip quickly to the competitive businesses. Again, I'm not gonna talk directly to everything that they do because there's a comprehensive list that you can see in that one slide that we talked about earlier. You can also go to our website to see, but essentially the competitive businesses is on the right-hand side. Under Earth Holdings, we essentially have 3. Earth Holdings is the operating company, but we've got 3 brands that operate within that. That's Earth Infrastructure, pole line, street light, traffic light, high voltage work, metering work. And then we got Solutions, which is a back office, hosting, billing, support services for the energy sector. And then Earth Energy, where we're kind of enabling and investing in new renewable technologies. Flip to the next slide. This gives a true picture of some of the growth that we've experienced over the years. So we're servicing not only customers on the competitive side of our business within the province of Ontario, where you see all those red dots there. We're servicing almost every utility in the province of Ontario in one way or another with our various business lines. And then, of course, we're servicing customers across North America. What's not shown on there is we've got customers in New Zealand and also down in the Caribbean as well. So it's a great news story for us, and we're very proud of that, and I hope the shareholders are proud of that as well. In terms of energy services, kind of a new area that we've been kind of growing, a business line that we've been growing over the last few years. We can flip to the next slide, please. You know, we're working with our shareholders to help develop renewable projects, deploy solar, EV charging. We currently have 7 solar investments, 2 of which are within your communities, one on the Embro Arena, one on the Tempsford Arena. They're 2 larger installations. I think one's 250 kilowatt, the other one's 200 kilowatt. We've got multiple other installations across our service territory, as well as we've been deploying a lot of an EV network. And I think the next slide speaks to that a little bit more. We can get flipped to that. So on the left there shows our sites where our solar installations are. To date, we have almost 1 megawatt of solar under contract. And then over on the right, we've been leveraging funding from NRCan, and we've got over 15 EV charging locations. You can see them dotted across our service territory from Port Stanley all the way up to Goddard, connecting our communities. Within those 15 locations, they're dual ports, so there's actually 30 ports for 30 vehicles that could charge at any one point in time across our service territory. And then lastly, I was asked to speak just briefly about the appointment to our board of directors and how that process kind of takes shape. So this is a policy that we developed in partnership with our shareholders back in 2019. It was approved by the board of directors. It was also unanimously approved by the shareholder back at that point in time. It was designed to essentially take a little bit of the risk out of our and provide continuity for our board of directors. Obviously, with 9 municipal shareholders, we have an election every 4 years. There's turnover in terms of members of council and so forth. I would say back in the early days, our corporate board of directors was primarily made up of politicians. In my opinion, if they have the proper skills to serve on that board, fine. But in a lot of cases, they didn't. So we've worked to diversify that board, and I'm very happy to say that the shareholders have supported this policy. So what we've got basically is a 3-tranche system, 9 shareholders. It somewhat gets away from the election cycle, although it does periodically land on the same time frame as an election. But in those 3 tranches, every 2 years, we go to 3 of the shareholders that are up for renewal. In Matt's case, we would come to you in 2025, and we would say his initial term is up. Do you want to extend that for the maximum, an additional 3 years, which would be the maximum term of 9 years serving on the board? And at that point in time, if you were to change them out, we would be providing you with a list of the skills that we would be looking for. We kind of keep a running tab of the skills of our current board, and obviously as members are turning over, there becomes gaps in that skill set, so we look to fill those skill gaps at that point in time. We're currently dealing with the town of Elmer right now, who will be turning over their representative, Mary French, who's a former mayor. They are going to be going to the market, looking to fill some of the skills that we're looking for. I would say right now that we've got a great board that's got a very diverse set of skill sets on both the boards. From the corporate perspective, corporate board, we're going to be emphasizing diversity, because I would say we're lacking some diversity on that board, and we would certainly, in my opinion, that's not a good representation of ERTH. So we'll be trying to help them, guide them on that journey. We also work with them at that point in time to provide a template for the market. to advertise for the board representative, and in Elmer's case this time, they're actually going to include me in the process. So I think things are evolving with our shareholders in terms of the relationships, and I think that's a good news story for sure. Just lastly, on the last slide there, that's just basically the list of skill sets that we look for our board representatives. And again, it's ERTH Corporation is a big investment that you, the shareholders, own. It's over $100 million company. We're very proud of that. We take it very seriously. And you know what? We're proud of the fact that we've come to a point in time with the shareholders that we've got this relationship that we're looking for the proper skills that we need to help us grow that business and deliver, you know, the value that you folks are looking for. And with that, I think that's the end of my slides. So if there's any questions, I'm happy to answer any.
Thanks, Chris. Questions from council? Paul?
Yeah, thanks for the presentation. You answered some of my questions in your presentation, but you talked about the board at the end. Each shareholder has a board member, but each shareholder has a different percentage of the ownership. So is it one director, one vote, or are there weighted votes on some or all issues?
One vote.
One vote on all issues.
On all issues.
Okay, that's good to know. And the slide that's the second slide that was titled About ERTH, there's a couple of short forms in there. What's an LDC and what's an EPC?
LDC is a local distribution company, so
Okay.
that's the regulated utility.
Okay.
Okay, and an EPC is there's a couple different EPCs. So
Okay.
I was trying to think of what reference it was, but it's
Right.
reference to
It's
Earth Power
the for
Corporation.
1 says EPC for 1 megawatt of solar.
Oh, okay, that's the energy services, procurement, and construction.
Okay.
Yep.
I'm glad to see you had to think about it first.
I did have to think about it because there's two EPCs. Earth Power Corporation is a short form, and then
Yeah.
there's the EPC
Yep.
for general contracting purposes.
And my last question is the slide that had all the writing on it about, it was titled the strategy overview.
Yes.
Under there was market reputation.
Yes.
And the quote, it said, advocate for positive, sustainable energy policy and reduced regulatory burden. Can you expand a little bit on
Sure.
what that's
Our-
about?
I've had a slide in former decks that would illustrate the amount of regulatory oversight that the utility business has. And it was back in 2000 when the government went to this, deregulated the market. They claimed that it would be a light-handed regulatory market. It's anything but. We've got about 10 regulatory bodies that have oversight on that business. So continually in partnership with our association, we've been advocating for light-handed regulation. When we go to do a cost of service rate application with the Energy Board, which happens every 5 years, we'll be doing that in, we had an extension because of the merger with Goddard. We had, I think, a deferral for up to 9 years. We'll be going in 2027, 2028. That document is probably about 2 years worth of work to do it well, and it's 2 binders that are about that full. So that's just an example of we're not light-handed regulated. We're very heavily regulated.
So essentially you want to see less red tape.
Less red tape. I think that's a little bit of the theme of the government in position today. We'll see if that's the case. I don't know, but absolutely, they've been pushing a mandate on the Ontario Energy Board to see less red tape as well. So we'll see if that aligns. We're seeing some improvement, but not to the extent that we'd like.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else? Yep.
Really just wanting to understand, like, the overall benefit is obviously that we have less risk, we have some risk mitigation in owning this or having a stake in this larger company. As you guys are planning to continue to grow, is that the number one way that we can ultimately look for some efficiencies to reduce end user costs? Because I mean, that's the biggest benefit to the taxpayer who owns it.
Yes, absolutely. As we grow, we can expand our services. We can look to have more specialized services as well, and lower our costs. Yeah.
And so anything in these service areas is an owned infrastructure by ERTH, correct?
In the 15 communities, yes,
Yeah, in
it
those
is.
communities, yeah. And so we have a lot of discussion about asset management, and you guys have the same strategy, replacement strategies and long-term.
Absolutely.
yeah,
We have
forecasting.
in another set of slides, I can show you a comprehensive program that we use to do asset management, but we have a library of probably 10 years worth of project. Every year, we look at a portfolio of about 3 years worth of projects, and we actually optimize that through this system that we call the optimizer. And we look at the projects that provide the best value and make the most business sense for us.
And last question, so we've been putting money aside for fiber throughout the municipality. You guys don't have a telecom wing or any kind of communications wing.
Nope.
Any interest in getting into that? I've heard that the reasons why we can't get fiber to everybody somewhat relates to available contractors out there. Is that something that ERTH's interested in getting into more of?
Yes, we do. And I'm a big believer in the fact that we can't do everything. You see the list of our kind of comprehensive
Yeah.
services. That's why I'm interested in certain strategic partners.
Thanks.
Anyone else? Thanks very much, Chris, Eustacia.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Look forward to the event in March. As soon as you have a date for it, even if you don't know the full details, as soon as you have a date, if you could let us know so we can all
Yeah,
lock it in our
absolutely.
calendars. Look forward to that. And then when will the AGM be again?
AGM is usually the last week of
End of May?
May, first week of June.
Yeah, okay, good.
Yeah,
Okay.
another good
Thanks very much.
opportunity to come out. All right, thank you.
And moved by Mitchell, seconded by Finch, that item 7A, Earth Power Corporation Council orientation be received and filed for information purposes only. Is there any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. And item 7B, Stephanie Radu, Curator, Beachville and District Museum. I think you know probably everybody here now, staff, so I'll just turn it over to you to do your presentation.
I'm all set with a mic here, or, yeah, I think there used to be a button. Okay, great. So I won't go through the document in too much detail. I'm assuming everybody has had access to it to kind of go through the several pages of information that I offered. The idea, obviously, is that we've got a few members of council that are new that we want to really give an orientation to regarding the museum, and then also kind of give a sense to council and returning staff about, you know, what we've been doing in the last few months of 2022 and heading into 2023. So hopefully that captures some of the projects we're working on, as well as just the overall structure of how the museum operates and the types of services that it offers. So I will address just like a few pieces of this document and expand on those for the information of council, and then obviously happy to take any questions at the end. One of the things I do mention in the section on property, which is your second section of the document there, is the ISIP grant, and this is one that is a multi-year project that's administered through the Ministry of Infrastructure. This grant has occupied a lot of time amongst our board members as well as our volunteers and our staff, and it's a really important piece for us to update our infrastructure. The building that the museum operates out of, as I indicate, is dated to 1851, and most of our agricultural complex is stored in two barns that were erected in 1991, 1992. So the ISIP grant was applied for in 2018 and will extend funding until 2026 through a partnership between the provincial government and the federal government to update our basements in the museum. We have two sides of those basements, and then to redo the floors in our barns, and also to climate control the barn that's at the north part of the property, which we call Barn 1. So if I mention the ISIP grant, that's just a bit of background to what that project looks like. Really, the property projects this year were a pairing of both looking towards accessibility upgrades and also making the grounds more welcoming. We had targeted activating the grounds as a action area for our past strategic plan, and we saw a lot of improvements to that, but redoing the sidewalks, adding the kiln shell to the main entrance of the museum, pulling down the chain link fence and adding some armor stones there has really opened up the grounds for a lot of the events that we run on the grounds, and also for our programs like the camp program that make use of the property. But it also has great visibility from the road, the kiln shell and the sidewalks, and so it's about showing those who are passing by that things are happening at the museum, and that we are making improvements and items like that. So moving on to the museum collection, this is just a real rundown of what we house, what we are stewards of, the type of artifacts that we possess and protect. One of the things we're looking at heading into 2023 is updating our collections policy. That policy is a bit outdated, and a lot of changes have occurred in how we manage the collection. So we want the policy to really reflect how we're looking to move ahead with what we collect and how we tend to the artifacts in our care. The other piece is that you'll have read that we, as a museum, had not completed an inventory since 1999. These are really large-scale projects. Like, the inventory is a huge project. The other piece to collections management that is a massive project is having a deaccession project, and that's a very scary term for those who don't work in the museum field, for looking through your collection and identifying items that have gone past the potential of being restored or cared for long-term, that are either deteriorated or duplicates or don't fall within the geographic zone and the interpretive categories that we look to represent in our museum. So those are both pieces, updating the collections policy and working towards some deaccessions that we'll look to work through for 2023. And also continuing on with the work that we completed in the inventory, we are continuing to add photographs to our catalog. When I mention the catalog, we're referring to our Past Perfect software there. In the past 2 years, we've added around 10,000, close to 11,000 records to that database, and the records all have locations or a spot for particular photos that help us track the condition of an artifact and just keep better track of what that artifact looks like and its features. So up until the end of 2022, our catalog accounted for 16,000 images, and we continue to build on that. In this section, I was also addressing a little bit about our exhibitions, our permanent exhibitions and rotating exhibitions that we house. This is a way for us to make sure our artifacts are on display for the visiting public. One piece that we've been attending to through 2022 and heading into 2023 is the Quarry Room. The Quarry Room is on the second floor of the museum. It was renovated through late 2021 and most of 2022. We just installed new LED lighting, redid the floors, and so we're in a place where we're ready to start putting the exhibits back up or redesigning the exhibits and getting those installed. So it'll be a really exciting opportunity for council to come by when that exhibit is done and we launch it, and to see how we can improve our permanent exhibits with better research and contemporary display furniture pieces. In addressing our annual events, so our regular events obviously have been an area of challenge through the pandemic. A lot of those we were not able to run. When they go on a hiatus or we aren't able to offer them, there's questions about how quickly they'll rebound and what kind of visitation we'll get to those events or participation we'll get in those events once you relaunch. We were very, very lucky in 2022, and the community really came back in great numbers for a lot of our annual events, so that was just so encouraging to see. And we do try to scatter those events through the year. Many of our events we had to modify through the pandemic if we were able to still offer them in a modified form. And it, again, very encouraging to see how the board and the volunteers and the staff were able to adjust and pivot and make sure that we are running events and programs where we could. And I also want to reiterate with council that, you know, we always have to keep track of our visitor numbers, and it's something that most of our grants, you know, our operating grants, our project grants, want to know how many people come through your door, and that number is kind of held as an indicator of how a museum is doing. But what we've learned and what we know from small town museums is that, you know, one person that comes and has a really great experience, it then inspires them to go into a history program, or then inspires them to become a volunteer, or inspires them to speak to their community about donating heirlooms to the museum. That is such a larger impact than a family of 4 that come in, you know, okay, great, cool, we did this for 45 minutes and we're leaving, you know. So the numbers aren't the full measure of how a museum is doing and what its value is in a community. Moving on to our, talking about our programs. Our programs are really a major part of what we do in the community. Our summer camp program has seen huge success during the pandemic and leading into 2023. I want to just note that, you know, there were a lot of programs, just like the events, that suffered during the pandemic, and it was only because townships, both the Southwest Oxford and Zorra Township, supported us continuing to try to offer this program amidst all of the new regulations and closures, that program has been doing as well as it has been doing. Rather than just saying it's too dangerous, these are young kids, like let's not even try it. We had a lot of support from both townships and from our board and from our staff to try and make it happen, and it turned out to be a great success. So the families were so grateful to have a place to send their children for some fun and activity, and I just want to acknowledge that that was something that I think we did really well on over the past few years. In the community outreach section, we're just addressing the ways that we engage with our community partners, the way we reach out to other audiences that maybe don't make their way into our museum. So being present in the communities that we serve and that we represent is a very important part of our mission as a museum. So addressing just the way that we participate in presentations, that we attend fairs. Those opportunities change every year, right? Like we did a lot online over the past few years that we had never anticipated doing before the pandemic struck. And it really just depends on who kind of crosses our path and says, you know, we'd love to partner for this project. We have a great idea for you here. And we are, in most cases, able to respond and to try and, you know, try something new if that's on offer, and to, as I said, reach out to new audiences where we can and connect with people who otherwise might find our collection interesting or our programs interesting. Moving into funding, obviously, the museum tries to involve itself in a number of different funding streams, and this is just for the long-term sustainability of the museum. We would be nowhere without the operational funding that we receive from the townships. That is so crucial because, as I've mentioned in past delegations, it's not something that's offered by other tiers of government that readily. The provincial government and the federal government are great for project-type grants. You know, if you want to upgrade something, you want to work on an infrastructure project, you want to, you know, train staff, those types of projects, you can easily kind of apply for different types of funding. But when it comes to paying the hydro bill, keeping the lights on, and the water bills paid, like that is very hard to source elsewhere. So the municipality is just a core part of our funding structure in that way. But again, we don't take advantage of the fact that we have that stable operational funding. We try to use that as a way to strengthen our applications for project funding. Saying we have a full-time staff, saying we have these great programs that we're building on helps us be more successful in applications for youth employment, such as the Canada Summer Jobs Program and the Young Canada Works Program. So it paints a really nice picture when it's all working together, and you can get funding for different projects as well as for operations, and it all works together to build a much healthier financial environment for the museum. So looking ahead to 2023, I've listed a number of events that are upcoming. The Historical Society is hosting their February speaker series on February 14th with Gail Lewis, who will be speaking to Black pioneers and the restoration of Otterville's African Episcopal Cemetery. That will be at the museum at 7 p.m. Our AGM for the Historical Society will be on March 14th. 2023 at 7 p.m. in the program room as well. So all of our members are invited to be there for voting on our upcoming calendar and various items on the agenda, but we invite anybody who's interested in what's happening at the museum to also attend that meeting. Just some notes there as well on major projects that we're coming up with and events that are scheduled already for the year. And I've included the link for the museum there for upcoming events. So you'll notice we are welcoming our car shows back this year, which is was so much fun last year. An initiative started up by James Chamberlain, and the schedule is already confirmed. So if you're interested in coming out to those events, I have a few flyers with me today, but it's also fully listed on the events page for the website. And you'll also see them on Zorra Township's community calendar shortly. So, yeah, keep an eye out for that.
Thanks, Steph. Questions from council? Councillor Mitchell.
A comment and a couple of questions. First of all, really glad to see all the events and all the community outreach and all the involvement that you and the museum have done, because you need to be proactive. And if there's a lot of competition for people's time and for people's money, and if there ever was a time where you could just sit there, open the doors, and expect people to come in, that's long gone, and you need to give them a reason to come in. And even though it's a lot more work, you're doing that, and that, I think that's your credit, and is certainly why this museum has been as successful as it was. The two questions, in the report you mentioned the Southwestern Ontario Baseball Pass, which was a partnership between the Baseball Hall of Fame in St. Mary's, Labatt's Park in London, and yourself. Can you expand just a little bit on numbers or the success of that program?
Yeah, so largely that project was launched through Labatt Memorial Park. Tourism London really spearheaded the project, and when they applied for the tourism grant that sort of supported the launch of that project, one of the key components of that grant application is showing a regional scope. So in that sense, they really pulled the Canadian Baseball Hall of Fame and our museum together to try to develop more of a audience for local baseball in the region rather than specifically in London, Ontario. So they've really kind of led that development, and how the museum has benefited is just the promotional funds that they've put behind it, including our logo and our name and whatnot. I would say the traffic that we get from the pass is somewhat minimal, and that may be because it's still only in its second year. It may be because it hasn't really reached a presence online yet. I'm not 100% sure. We do have a meeting at the end of every year to see how it's gone. But again, it's in terms of, it's not going to be a major source of revenue for us per se. But it is a way for us to stay connected to our colleagues in the baseball field. And I do know that Labatt Memorial Park, like the upgrades that they've created there, both for their interpretive material and their presence, has really been well received. So, yeah.
So it's more about raising profile than raising funds.
And continuing to hold on to important partners, yes,
Yep.
and really making sure that those partners, where they're offering us promotional aids, like the reach that Tourism London has compared to what our museum has is
Yep.
substantial, and so we're very happy to partner with them for those benefits to the museum, and also to really help them in terms of securing funding for raising the profile of a sport that's really central to Beachville's legacy.
My other question, Zorra's taken a couple of initiatives in the heritage area, and one is the Zorra Heritage Committee, which I know you're involved in. The other one is the Cultural Mapping Task Force. So can just your involvement in one or either of those?
Yeah, I think that, I started at the museum about 5 years ago. We saw the recreation plan come through, and there are a lot of us who are involved with heritage who saw that heritage and other cultural sectors weren't really acknowledged as to what Zorra has to offer. And that was obviously one of those pieces that's a bit concerning, because you go, if it's not in the plan, it's not going to be planned for. And so it's very important to see that these groups are popping up, that are volunteer groups, like, in large, and are saying this is really an important part of our community, important part of our township. It needs to be acknowledged, and it needs to be something that's on council's radar and that's in the budgets, or that's at least a consideration for the future, right? To preserve these pieces and not to have a blanket approach to it, but to have a very specific approach to it, a good solid plan for how we're going to preserve these pieces or interpret these pieces or share these pieces with the public and preserve them for the future. So I think that it's important to note that it is, the volunteers are very much interested in staying involved and getting involved and contributing their time. The Historical Society of our museum is, providing a bit of a structure for the Zorra Heritage Committee at this point, which I think, with the expertise that we have on staff, we're eager to be helpful in any way that we can. And the Cultural Mapping Task Force, I know that it's in early days yet, but I do know that the members who are have been the lifeblood of our organization, that have been the lifeblood of HACA, it's great to see those individuals having a common purpose and having a common place to work together to have an impact on the township. So I'm very excited to see it. I think it is early days still to see how it's going to roll out. I think cultural mapping is really, we understand that it's the basis of planning ahead for making sure the heritage attractions, cultural attractions, arts attractions are all a part of the township's planning overall. So,
Thanks, Stephanie.
thank you.
Just as a follow-up to your one question, I know there is an idea for some promotion of the baseball pass at Oxford Tourism now between the utilizing the 3 heads of council of the different municipalities to try and do a new type of promotion for that pass idea. So looking forward to that. Any other questions from council? Crystal, Councillor Finch.
First, a comment. Your summer camps, whoops, can you hear me? Your summer camps are wonderful. My kids have been a part of them, and thank you for that. You have down here community outreach. How are you trying to get the public schools a part of your program?
So this was something that we have spoken to council about in the past, because it was lined up with a strategic plan with the Township of Zorra here as well. And we really, during the pandemic, weren't able to go into schools as much or have them out to our museums. So we developed online programs through Google Classrooms to offer a grade 4 program and a grade 7 program that connected to the Ontario curriculum. So that was our first initiative. It was conducted through some of our Young Canada Works Building Careers and Heritage grants that allowed us to hire an educational coordinator that developed those programs and then offered those programs. So we were taking school kits that we had developed and bringing those into the offices, and then they would bring them to the classrooms because we weren't formally allowed in, and then we would do everything online while they had the activities to do in the classroom. It's obviously our hope that we would be able to return to the schools in person, and that the students would be able to come out to the museum as school trips as well. That has yet to happen in 2022, 2023, but I think the school systems, teachers have had a rough past 2 years, and so we're trying to make ourselves available and make sure that we have those connections in the school board. When elections were occurring, I did speak to some of the candidates for school trustees, and I said one of the things that we struggle with is having an ongoing communication route between the schools and the museum. When we did hire the educational coordinator, that was a temporary year-long contract, and once that individual is gone, some of those connections are also lost. So it's really important that there is a consistent connection between the educators and museum staff, and I think that's one thing that we could do together to make sure that those programs are available, and that the schools in our area know we're eager to participate in those.
Again, as a follow-up on that, it was absolutely a passion project of former Mayor Lupton and of myself to get the schools more involved with the Beachville District Museum. A lot of the things that the museum does are in the curriculum of the schools already. It's there. The township instituted, I can't remember how many years ago, a policy where the township will fund, I can't remember the details of the policy, will fund basically a bus per school per year kind of thing for a field trip, as long as it's within the township. So there is funding available from the township to send a busload of kids directly to the museum, and there is the material available online that the teachers can use either instead of or in complement to a trip to the museum. But I really think in terms of that communication piece and continuing that relationship, that is a potential role that some of us can play. I mean, the reality is at the schools that there's turnover of principal, there's turnover of teachers as well as our staff, and that's another place where a lot of those connections are broken. And that is, ideally it would become sort of a normalized thing, and it wouldn't matter who was on council and who was working anywhere, but we're not there yet. But I think that's something that the 5 of us can play a role in, is in establishing those things, and frequently what it takes is for someone to go into the school and say, hey, I know you, teacher. I know about the Beachville District Museum. Did you know the township funds a bus? And then the dots are connected for people. And if we do that every year for a few years, then it becomes normal. Who's organizing that this year, as opposed to nobody knew about that. So I really strongly encourage each of us to go into the schools and say, did you know this was there? And try and find that teacher who's likely to actually go and make it happen. They will look after the principal and all those things to make it happen. But I really strongly encourage us to get into the schools and talk to them about that and make sure they know that this resource is available. When they're teaching, that chunk of history, which is essentially since, what does the museum cover in terms of time span of history? I mean, there's fossils. Yeah,
certainly. I would say the chunk of our artifacts are between the middle of the 1800s and the first half of the 1900s.
So I mean, that covers several years of curriculum of history in elementary school. So there's lots of reasons for them to get in there. And instead of talking about abstract sort of, pioneer times or whatever, they can go to the museum and look at something that came off their neighbor's property. There's our history. So we fund it. We fund the bus to go to it, It's our kids, it's our museum. This connection has to be made to happen.
And I will say too that some of the curriculum tie-ins aren't strictly for history. Like we did a grade 4 program on gears and pulleys, and that connects with the artifacts in our collection that used gears and pulleys as simple machines early on. And then our grade 7 program was more about the environmental impacts of quarrying, and it looks at the history of the quarries in our area, but it also looks at the contemporary impacts of quarrying. So, and that's something that we've developed, but it's not strictly a history curriculum, right, or a history component. So, but I appreciate your comments, Mayor Ryan, on trying to get, because I think the material's all there now, right? Like we had to develop the units, we had to develop the educational tools and the kits, but we're ready to go, and it's just a matter of, yeah, like you said, finding the right partners in the school system to make it happen.
It has to happen. It's invaluable, right? It has to happen. Yeah. Anything else? One thing I'm going to add then for council, just by way of a little bit of background, because there's a story here, I think, a governance story here, in that when I was first on council, both councils, Zorra and Swax, were going through a really hard time about what to do with the museum. They saw that there was value in the heritage, the cultural heritage that was there, but didn't know what to do with it. It wasn't thriving. And there was a point at which both councils were very seriously considering just shutting it down, getting rid of the collection, and saying, this is just not worth it. It's not happening. We're not doing it right. There's artifacts here that need to be somewhere safe, and we're not looking after them. We need to shut the whole thing down. Led by a small group of councillors, which at the time really did largely include former councillor Ron Forbes. The museum board itself, the community immediately around it, and then out to the two new councils, took a really hard look at it and decided to essentially reinvent the museum and develop a real reason for it to exist, and therefore how did it have to operate in order to exist. Hiring a full-time qualified curator, in particular Dr. Stephanie Redoute, was part of that project. So a lot of what you're seeing here came from a place of, let's shut it all down and not do it, and making a very conscious and goals-oriented decision to not do that. So it wasn't a decision to just let's not shut it down. It was, no, let's not shut it down because we do have a specific goal and an action plan in order to make that happen. So I just don't want that to be taken for granted that this all just happens now, because not that many years ago, it might not even have existed at all. So I think there's a real governance lesson for us in that when you take a really conscious look at what you are and aren't doing and why you are and aren't doing it, and therefore how you are and aren't doing it, this is the kind of results that you can get when you do that very deliberately. And I've gone on before about Stephanie's contribution to the museum, so I won't go on about that again today, except to say that.
And I think that it's a bit of an indication to what is possible with heritage planning and things like that in the township, if you get people involved who have the expertise and a core group of volunteers that are interested too, right? Because you might think there's no precedence for that in the township right now, but it's always possible, like you said, if you have goals and you have the right people on board.
And so now we have to just maximally exploit this and get our kids there and get the museum into the schools. I think once people know about this, they love it, right? People don't, oh, I didn't know we had a museum. I saw stuff in there from my neighbor's place. I knew a name on that thing, So I think we have to actually really put some effort into making that happen. We really have to double down on it. We spend money on it. Every time we get this presentation, every time I go to that museum, I'm impressed. We have to make more people go there. It will sell itself when they get there. Anybody else? Thanks, Tom.
Thank you.
Moved by Finch, seconded by Mitchell, that item 7B, Beachville Museum update and council orientation be received and filed for information purposes only. Anybody wish to speak to that? All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. And 8, reports from staff. 8.1, Fire Department, report 2023-006 from the Fire Chief regarding monthly fire report for December 2022. Chief, is there anything you want to highlight for council there?
Good morning. A couple things to highlight. I wanted to note that 5301 did go into service in Uniondale. Exciting, those 5 seats in that truck have been filled. Both of the calls, they're jumping out full PPE with a full truck on scene. So it's doing exactly what it was intended to do, which is awesome. Our 2023 recruits begin their first practical session this evening. They started attending practice in December at each of their stations and orienting to kind of Zorra Fire and each of the way they do things before they head off to the RIFSOC training. They've all got PPE, they've been on air, and they're hopefully ready to shine tonight. They've also worked away at their standard first aid training and medical delegation, so that's going well. RIFSOC, I wanted to highlight that we've landed on our decisions in December for standard first aid training, so all 63 firefighters will receive their standard first aid certification this year in addition to their medical delegation and get us back on track with that. It's a big budget item, so I wanted to highlight that one's coming and getting done. And then a multi-station training night that we had in December. We had the officers come down from Perth, and we did kind of a debrief on the water rescue incident there. It was some good kind of closure for our team that attended and be able to reflect and debrief on that. And then some really good learning and takeaways for an incident of that size, multi-day. So lots of learning there from the emergency management perspective as well. The other item I wanted to highlight, I was out at Uniondale Monday night for their practice, and they were that one. Okay. I was just going to share, I'll make it short and sweet. Uniondale Firefighters Association donated $15,000 to the Kentora AJ Baker Playground, and I think that's high level and worth sharing that they fundraised that and put it right back into the community.
Questions from council for the chief? Councilor Mitchell. Finish your report before I ask council for questions.
I'm done.
Thanks. Questions from council? Councillor Mitchell.
Well, for a change, I don't have a question, but I do have a heartfelt comment, and I want to say a huge thank you for the firefighter recognition night. It was just excellent. I thought it struck the proper balance between a social event and a formal event, both in the dress and the way the program was presented. I was thinking Mayor Margaret, she would have loved it. She loved men in uniform and women in uniform too. And there was a lot of uniforms there. And anyway, I thought the recognition of the retirees, the long service members, and along with all the presentations of the training certificates, just melded together perfectly. And I think we celebrated these achievements of the young and old. And what I saw was a passing of the torch, both in membership and leadership. And so I just wanted to say thank you very much.
Anyone else? So yes, I was not able to be at the event, but as you know, it was very important to me that the event did in fact happen. We had backed up through COVID quite a few long-term firefighters. Happy the event happened, and I want to especially thank Deputy Mayor Grigg for her remarks on the evening representing the township in my absence. So thank you very much for organizing that, Chief. Anyone else? Moved by Mitchell, seconded by Finch, that report 2023-006 from the fire chief be received and filed for information purposes only. Anybody wish to speak to that? All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. Thank you, Chief. And 8.2, Recreation Department A, report 2023-007 from the Director of Recreation and Facilities regarding monthly recreation report for December 2022. Matt.
So nothing to highlight on this report for myself.
Questions from council on the report? Councillor Mitchell.
Just one quick one, Matt, and that's under projects. It mentions the cultural mapping task force has started holding meetings. I'm just wondering what township staff are being dedicated to assisting that task force.
So to prepare for the task force, Alicia did a significant amount of work preparing kind of in advertising and getting that task force together. So as they meet as a group now, we start to take a bit more of a hands-off approach. We've given them the tools and resources is the idea. So for the first two meetings, staff were present. They held it in council chambers, and we were here with them. As they move to their next meeting, they'll be meeting independently. They have been provided with kind of instead of doing minutes and an agenda in that way, they'll be doing a bit more of like a wrap-up report. They give kind of some of the details that just gets filed to staff. And then we act as a resource person. So if they need, whether it be something technologically or if they need contacts, if they need us to do a bit of work, they can reach out and we can work with them on that project. So that's where we're at with them. So they're for the next meeting, the plan is that staff won't be attending. They'll be working on their own, but they do have a few resources we're going to give them ahead of the meeting for them to be able to run it.
So we're actually, as opposed to the previous committees, we're not tying up as much staff time, because usually there was at least two staff members attending ZRAC and police committee meetings.
That's correct, and I would also note that where we were at a point where we would prepare reports for those committees also in advance for if they had a decision to make. Often we would prepare a report for them from staff. This is kind of the task force doing the work, bringing their ideas, bringing their kind of, in this case, their knowledge of the assets, of the cultural assets of the township, versus staff presenting something to them. So I think there's a positive there as well.
Thanks, Matt.
Any other questions on the report? I had just the one question, Matt, about the Embro Town Hall stairs, and as that project progresses, I'm assuming that there is ongoing conversations with Thistle Theatre about how they're involved in that and how, as you know, one of, if not the primary ultimate user for it.
Yeah, so I met with them kind of just last week on the 12th. We met just after kind of having the initial time with the architecture and engineering firms to discuss kind of what are some of our options moving forward. And then as we go into any design work, we'll be working directly consulting with the group as we get concept designs or anything like that.
Excellent, thank you. Any other questions? Moved by Finch, seconded by Mitchell, that report 2023-007 from the Director of Recreation and Facilities be received and filed for information purposes only. Anybody wish to speak to that? All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. And 8.2B, Report 2023-009 from the Director of Recreation and Facilities regarding playground replacement strategy follow-up. Matt, is there anything you want to highlight in there for council?
Just to note that, so this is to come back from, so we did the initial replacement strategy report back in November. This is additional information and as well as some details of kind of some what is possible for our project that's coming forth in 2023. So just noting that I wanted to include much of the body of the old report in there because we have changed council terms between these two reports. The bolded text is the new information for council, so as you read through, you can highlight those sections, please.
Thanks, Matt. Questions from council on the report? Councillor Finch.
I just am wondering, some of the playgrounds that you have in your update, like, let's use the Ember Arena for example. What happens to those playgrounds if you're going to update it and, like, could you put that into another park or does it have to be completely thrown away?
It wouldn't have to be thrown away in the sense that it could be, so similar how we just deem property surplus, we can then deem that this is now something we're not going to use anymore, and if it has a useful life, we can look at, we have a auction website we use called GovDeals for auctioning off vehicles or kind of assets as they disappear. It would be difficult to put it into service in another site. We're looking at the reason for replacement is that either it doesn't meet the compliance of the current kind of CSA standard, it's not an accessible playground, or it's getting to the point where its life cycle for repairs and maintenance is no longer viable. So I wouldn't want to put it in service into another park. If we had a good reason for removing it, I think we would look at deeming it surplus and then basically if it's something that's not going to be a risk that some other person could decide if they want to place into their home and sell it as surplus through GovDeals. And GovDeals, the purpose for it being an auction is it's kind of how the reverse of us doing a tender where we want bidding or open like process for us purchasing something. We want an open process for the sale of something as well. So any resident or other person could bid on it.
Any other questions for Matt on the report? Moved by Mitchell, seconded by Finch, that report 2023-009 from the Director of Recreation and Facilities be received and filed for information purposes only. Anybody wish to speak to that? Deputy Mayor Grigg.
I just wanted to make a quick comment because obviously this has been something that's pretty significant on my radar, and I've had a lot of communication with residents about what our parks are like and what they want from parks, and wanting to make sure that when we make these significant investments out of our budget that we're getting something that's going to serve the community. So I want to thank staff for this report. I'm happy to see the expanded age range of intended use for the variety of parks that are going to be going in over the next few years, and also that the information in this report and specifically the visuals, while they are just examples of what that could look like and definitely not something that we can, they're draft plans, but I think they give residents a better idea of what it is that's going to be coming. And it also provides us as council members the tools to have those conversations with residents when they're concerned. And if they truly feel like this is not something that's going to serve the community, then they can, come forward, make a delegation if they think that there's another avenue that needs to be taken. So great information in this report. Happy to receive and file, and thanks to staff for doing this.
Anyone else? All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. And thank you, Matt. And 8.3, Building and Drainage Department, Report 2023-003 from the Chief Building Official Drainage Superintendent regarding monthly building and drainage report for December 2022. Mike, is there anything there you want to highlight for council?
Yeah, I would just highlight another busy year with a lot of new houses, and again, 300 permits for that year is pretty busy.
Questions for Mike on the report? Councilor.
Yeah, just on that note about 300, is there any way to project whether we're on track next year to be in the same range? I know it's difficult based on where planning applications are or anything like that, but just what is down the pipeline, just to know that we're going to continue to grow.
Yeah, it's slowing down in single-family dwellings, obviously. Rate hikes have certainly put the brakes on things. A lot of it'll depend on maybe what Kingwood, how far they proceed this year with stuff, and yeah, whether they keep the rates up or not.
Anyone else?
Not a question, but I looked at the numbers, $91 million worth of permits issued, and that works out to $10,582 for every man, woman, and child in Zorra Township, which I think is a pretty significant number and shows the amount of growth and the work that people are doing in this township.
Anyone else? Moved by Finch, seconded by Mitchell, that report 2023-003 from the Chief Building Official Drainage Superintendent be received and filed for information purposes only. Anybody wish to speak to that? All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. Thanks, Mike.
Thank you.
And 8.4, Public Works Department, report 2023-004 from the Director of Public Works regarding monthly Public Works report for December 2022. Steve, is there anything you want to highlight for council in that?
No, nothing to highlight this time.
Questions from council? Deputy Mayor Grigg.
I have a question, and this may be for Karen or Alicia more than Steve. So as part of this report speaks to an ask from local government week from Zorra Highland Park School, will there be any correspondence back to the school about the, okay, thank you.
Anyone else? My thanks then on behalf of the entire township, Steve, please to, I mean, I know I thanked you on the weekend and everything, but please, you know, from the council meeting, I know I speak on behalf of all of council on this, for everybody's work on during that special weather event, especially at Christmas. When they all had families, they were missing as well, so that, you know, so that other people could then get to their families. And certainly my family personally benefited from that, in that people were able to come to my house on Christmas Day who would not have been able to come, especially at the corner at my house, where they spent, I don't know, I think 6 hours on about a 300 or 400 meter stretch of road, got a loader up and everything so that the plow could get through, like a loader so the plow could get through. And I think they literally spent about 6 hours that day. I know they turned around in my driveway, like, I don't know, how a dozen times or something like that. It was a disaster. And literally, I could not have had family at my house. They couldn't have come on Christmas morning, but by Christmas afternoon, they were able to come. And that was because other people, Zorra Township staff, were not at home with their families. So please make sure that everybody at Public Works hears that from council, and how much that's appreciated. I know residents were extremely grateful on those days that people were out there and doing this. So yeah, I can't say enough about it. I know they all get paid. I know it's their job. I know they knew it when they signed up for it. That doesn't mean that we can't thank them and that we shouldn't thank them for doing that. That was absolutely above and beyond. So
Appreciate it, and I will pass it on. Thank you.
anybody else, questions on this report? Moved by Mitchell, seconded by Finch, that report 2023-004 from the Director of Public Works be received and filed for information purposes only. Anybody wish to speak to that? All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. And Steve, again, 8.4B, report 2023-001 from the Director of Public Works regarding tree bylaw review. Is there anything you want to highlight for council in there?
Nothing to highlight, no.
Questions from council? Councilor Mitchell.
Steve, I appreciate your comments on planting trees on roadsides, and my concerns are multiple, including accumulation of snow and ice, roadside drainage, roots undermining pavement, liability of the township in case of motor vehicle collisions. So I just wonder if you could comment on any of those or any other factors that you see, pros and cons of planting trees beside roads.
Well, you've got most of them covered there. I mean, the main pro for trees on roadsides are aesthetics. And, you know, I like the looks of trees on roadsides, but, I mean, they're not the ideal, in my honest opinion, and not the ideal position for a tree to live a long, fruitful, undisturbed life is not a roadside. There's a lot of factors that hinder the tree's growth, and excessive trimming that's needed for over roads, over fields, for ditching under the drip lines, and field operations under the drip lines that disturb the roots. There's road contaminations that do also hinder trees. Like I said, I like to see the trees on the roadside. I love the aesthetic looks of the trees on the roadside. They do, you know, they look great. But as far as giving a tree a good long life, it's maybe not the most ideal place to put them.
Anyone else? Counselor Stewart.
Yeah, understanding the motion likely to come is that we're gonna continue looking at this, and Steve and I talked about it too, is just adding coniferous trees to the list of approved. A lot of what we have is regulations in that bylaw speak to planting, within the towns, and again, with roadsides and sight lines and that kind of thing. Back in March, this resolution looked like it was intended to, and again, it's one of the Upper Thames targets, but increase windbreaks and buffers, and that's usually more of an issue out in the country. And keeping them away from the roadsides, hopefully we can find a way to encourage plantings between farm fields, hedgerows, and that kind of thing to help with that goal. And I know that Upper Thames does have some resources, so maybe just sort of partnering with them a little bit, or at least advocating for what they have out there and pushing that out to the public as well as part of this.
Anyone else? Counselor Mitchell.
Just to follow up, the trees from Tourism Oxford, how many are we expecting, and who's going to nurture them for the first year or two to get them going?
So they'd like to see 15 trees planted, which we can honor that, and Public Works staff will nurture them until they get going. Tourism Oxford will pay for that service to have them planted and taken care of until they get rooted and well on their way.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Moved by Stewart, seconded by Grigg, that report 2023-001 from the Director of Public Works be deferred, and that council direct staff to provide a follow-up report with additional details regarding resident replacement tree requirements and boundary trees. Councillor Stewart, as the mover, do you wish to speak to this? Deputy Mayor Grigg is the seconder. Do you wish to speak to it? Anyone else? Could I just ask a question, I guess, for my understanding, if nothing else, about, I guess, has there been discussion with staff about what the details are that you're looking for in this when you get it back? We're good? All right, I'm good then. Anybody else wish to speak to it before I call the question? All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. And 8.4C, report 2023-005 from the Director of Public Works regarding a construction update of the Zorra Maintenance Facility. Steve, is there anything you want to highlight in there?
No, nothing to highlight.
Questions from council? Councillor Mitchell.
Two questions, Steve. The solar equipment, has this been installed and inspected, and is it now in service?
The solar equipment is complete, yes. We're just waiting on Hydro to for a bit more work they have to do on their behalf before testing can start. But we're just a little bit on hold right now, but everything is installed and ready to go.
The building itself was electrified several months ago, so it's operational. It's
That's
just
correct.
that the solar component is
That's
not
100% correct,
totally
yes.
going. And the following question, does our contract with Elgin Contracting include a completion date and any penalties if there is?
No, it does not.
Okay, I have some comments and some research that I did, but if there's a motion to that come to the floor, and I'll save those till that part comes up.
Anybody else questions on the report? Just to clarify then, Steve, how many wells are yet to be finished?
My last reported to me was 4 wells.
Okay. And those 4 are in various stages of completion?
That's correct, yes. They're all down 2 bedrock. They have to be completed to the full depth.
Okay, thank you. So any other questions before I read the motion? Moved by Stewart, seconded by Grigg, that the CAO and Director of Public Works be instructed to seek a legal opinion regarding contractual obligations at Zorra Maintenance Facility with respect to drilling of geothermal wells and connectivity of the system. Councillor Stewart, as the mover, do you wish to speak to that?
Yeah, I agree with this motion because we're hindered from moving in, and it's one thing that seems to be dragging out over anything else, and there are some other things that are still in the works, but obviously the main factor here is the well drilling, affecting our ability to make this a useful asset for us, so that's why I'm in support of this.
Deputy Mayor Grigg is the seconder.
I know Paul has a lot coming, so maybe I'll be a little bit restrictive with my comments. This has been incredibly frustrating for quite an amount of time now, and you know, primarily we need to be operating out of that shop for us to be able to deliver the level of service to our residents that we are committed to. So it's incredibly frustrating that this project, this component of the project does not feel like it's been prioritized or that it's been managed responsibly. So I'm in full support of seeing exactly what we have in terms of teeth in this through legal consultation. I think at some point there has to be responsibility taken for the miscalculations made when bidding on this project, and I think we're long past Zorra being responsible for some of these miscalculations. It's not only costing us the extra money in time and materials that they're attempting to bill to us through these change orders, but also the added costs of borrowing from extending this project out and us dealing with different interest rates. So incredibly frustrated, in absolute full support of this motion.
Anybody else wish to speak to it? Councillor Mitchell.
I prepared these comments before I knew there was going to be a motion, and I did a fair bit of research. And I want to preface them by saying that there's lots of blame to go around, but none of it should go on Steve Oliver's shoulders. He's been caught in the middle on this. He's brought all these reports, told us the latest delay, the latest boondoggle, the latest excuses, and I don't think there's anybody in this room that wants to get this project done more than Steve Oliver does. But there is lots of blame to go around. We hired an architectural firm, a general contractor, and through them at least one subcontractor who have failed to come through with what we expected from them. It's been 25 months since we awarded the contract, 21 months since this construction began. And in my experience, I spent 11 years delivering concrete, and I worked on many projects that were much bigger than this that were completed in less than a year. This is a big project for us, but for this type of building, and Kevin can back me up on this, this is not a big deal. I understand that their construction is facing challenges with supply chain issues and labor issues, but in my mind, there's no way that this project shouldn't have been completed in a year and a half from awarding the contract and 12 to 15 months from the beginning of construction. And here we are, we still aren't in there, and we don't know when we can get in there. It's just basically an unreasonable amount of time to get this done. And in result, we have a significant added cost for Zorra. Katie alluded to them. Not only have we not been able to get into the facilities, we haven't been able to realize any of the economies of having these new facilities, and we've had the added cost of continuing to run 2 outdated shops over this time. And the other is the financing costs, and I'll get back to that in a moment. But what I did was I went through every ZMF report that Steve has brought to us, and I focused on the geothermal drilling components specifically. And I'll quickly read through the key bullet points that I pulled out, and each of us can assign who's to blame for this misstep. May 5th, 2021, test well, thermal response and conductivity values. Told it was missed, an extra cost $18,645. May 19th, meeting scheduled regarding the size constraints in the mechanical and electrical rooms because of the solar and geothermal components that have to go in there. June the 2nd, mechanical and electrical rooms altered, reducing lube oil storage and room capacity. June 16th, change order, increased structural steel to support the geothermal HVAC unit on the roof. July 7th, well drilling ongoing, preparing to test soil conductivity. August the 4th, well drilling on goal. Goal is 44 wells to 425 feet. September 1st, well drilling ongoing, all poly piping on site. Then we don't get anything about it until February the 16th, 2022. Many well drilling hurdles, solutions estimated from 103,000 to 250,000, discussions ongoing. March 23rd, supply lines from shop and rooftop unit to mechanical room installed. Add 14,000 feet of steel casing and rig to install at an extra cost of $128,000. April 20th, staff request update on well drilling progress and projected completion date. May 4th, report from the well drillers dated April the 13th. 16 wells a year after they started drilling to 410 feet and 2 wells to 365 feet. They predict that the 25 wells will be completed by April the 30th. Drilling will be completed by June the 1st. May 18th, general contractor completion schedule, and I have printed off a copy of it. Said the construction and landscaping would be completed by July 12th, 2022, and remember that date. August 17th, high conductivity test results. Consultant reduced number of wells to 32 from 44. And remember, this is 15 months since the test well was drilled, which was supposed to be to test the conductivity, and 12 months since they said they were going to test the conductivity of the wells that they had drilled to that point. They're saying 22 wells completed and being connected and backfilled and drilling to restart when done. Staff requested revised drilling cost. September 21st, meeting regarding the well drilling progress and cost adjustment. Drilling and connections to completed by November. October the 5th, drilling well number 25, still discussing cost adjustments. So in the last 6 weeks, they've got 3 wells drilled. November the 2nd, drilling well number 28. So they're getting better. They drilled 3 wells in the last 4 weeks. November 16th, wells 23 to 29 drilled to bedrock. Estimate 1 hole per day drilled through bedrock. Letter attached says the extra cost of the company were $145,000. They offered us a credit of just under $30,000. December the 7th, the wells number 23 to 31 are drilled to bedrock to begin drilling through bedrock November 28th. And the last reports on this agenda, January the 18th, 28 wells completed as of January 6th. When drilling done, the connections will still need to be done. No completion date offered. They're offering a credit of just under $32,000. As far as the financial impact of this on us, when we assigned this contract in December 2020, the Bank of Canada rate was 0.25%. The debenture rate that we made all our calculations and our decision on at that time was 2.15%, which was going to cost us $2.4 million in financing cost over the next 25 years. And just as an aside, the bank prime rate at that time was 2.45%. December the 7th, Bank of Canada set their rate at 4.25%. In the budget that Diane presented, she calculated 4.8%, 4.87% as a debenture rate, which would have cost us $6.3 million in interest over the next 25 years. And as an aside, the bank prime rate on December the 7th was 6.45%. Now remember July 13th? If you go back to June 1st, on that date the Bank Canada was set at 1.5% and the bank prime rate was 3.7. On July 13th, Bank of Canada set the rate at 2.5%. The bank prime rate was 4.7. I don't know what the debenture rates would have been on either of those dates. I don't have access to that kind of information. But a week from today, the Bank of Canada is going to raise it again. All expectations are at least another 0.25%, which is going to put the debenture rate well over 5%, add hundreds of thousands of dollars more to our cost. And we still don't know when we can debenture this building because we can't debenture it until it's completed, and they won't tell us when it's completed. I think we've had multiple times where we've said to Steve, go back and tell them that council's not happy. Well, council's more than beyond not happy right now. It's time that we take action, and I think, unfortunately, since we didn't have a deadline in the contract, there was no penalties associated, and I'm not sure who takes the heat on that, but we need to do something. This is dragging on, and it's costing literally millions of dollars. So if we're going to we're going to negotiate whether we're going to get $30,000 or $32,000 grant. That's pretty small potatoes compared to the $2+ million that this is going to cost us because they didn't build it when they should have got it done. So that's my research. And as always, when I go on at length, thanks for listening to me.
Anybody else wish to speak to it? Deputy Mayor Gregg.
Just really quick, I'm really glad that you made those comments, Councillor Mitchell, about Steve Oliver and his role in this, clarifying that at no point has this been has the problems with this been his responsibility. But I do want to point out that when we undertook this project and you're laying out all of those dates and what was happening, that he's had to, as part of his job, shuffling his responsibilities of managing how many kilometers of road do we have in the municipality, right? So, I mean, there's significant responsibility in the role that he carries 365 days a year. And because this project hasn't been completed, that's had significant impact on his workload that should, at this point, he should have been done with that and able to just focus on what his role is. So going through that long list, it was very long. But it also is a reminder of the added responsibility and frankly, wasted time that our own staff are having to deal with this because it's not being appropriately resolved in a timely manner.
Anyone else? This situation is unacceptable. Staff spent a lot of time working out what our needs were for this facility. Council spent a lot of time debating it and making an ultimate decision on how to move forward with it. The intention of moving forward with this facility was that there was going to be value for our residents in building it. Now, not only are we not extracting any value from it, we're now incurring the extra costs of operating old buildings, which was one of the prime motivators to get out of it, and compromising our own staff's, workplace, and the extra cost now of financing the project as it's gone on past its time. We've been more than patient. We've absolutely tried to work with them at every step of the way, even to the extent of redesigning the system to say, this is reasonable. If the system is going to perform as well as needed with fewer wells, absolutely, let's talk about that. But I have not seen a commitment from, and frankly, the well driller is none of our business because we didn't contract them. It's the general contractor. I've seen no commitment from them, per the tremendous details from Councillor Mitchell, that they've made any attempt to meet any of the original or multiply revised schedules to get any of the wells drilled to the depth that they were set to. I really want to thank Councillor Stewart for bringing this forward. It's strongly worded, and I think the comments from council today are strong as well. They need to be as strong as possible. We need to arm our staff with the strongest position possible going forward to the general contractor. The current situation is unacceptable. We're taking millions of dollars from our residents, the single largest spend on a single project in the history of the township, to deliver value to them, and we're not getting the value. And in the end, that's all that matters. And the reason we're not getting the value now is because these wells have not been drilled to where they need to be drilled per the schedule they need to be drilled to. And that needs to be resolved, and it needs to be resolved right away so that our staff can get out of the buildings that they're in, get into the new building, and start doing a better job on behalf of our residents. So again, happy that Councillor Stewart brought this forward. And is there anybody else who wants to speak to it before I call the question? All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. And strong direction given to staff on the dissatisfaction of council with the situation. And thank you, Steve. And 8.5, Finance Department Report 2023-008 from the Director of Finance regarding the 2023 budget. Hard to imagine that that's going to be like a little bit of a come down from the previous item, but here we are. Diane, is there anything you want to highlight in that report for council?
No, I just want to also verify, based on our last discussion, there was no other changes within the budget after the December 21st meeting. So the tax levy sits at 8.15% right now. Our growth was 1.35%, which brings our tax rate to 6.72% based on the current budget that's set before us right now.
Questions from council? Councilor Mitchell.
Yes, thanks, Diane, and thanks for including the sheet, Schedule A, about reserves, because this is something that we've talked about a lot, especially as part as we get further and further into longer planning, capital planning, and building our reserves. So I looked at not only what the funds were, I looked at the numbers that were plugged in there. And what I thought was that they broke down into 4 different categories. And I'd just like to go through those 4 categories and my interpretation of why those numbers are like that. And you can tell me if I'm anywhere close or if I'm completely out in left field on this. So the first reserves are ones where the numbers don't change past 2023. And that includes the working fund, the insurance deductible, surplus deficit, land development, fire equipment, village affairs / ERTH, parkland federal gas tax. And my theory is that the contributions and withdrawals are determined by income and expenses that we don't know yet, that will depend on the operations of the township over the next 10 years. So how close to am I on that one?
Okay, just to give a brief overview of the reserve schedule that's in front of you, it's developed from the 10-year capital plan. So this is the first year that we've actually gone and did a full 10-year capital plan. Prior years it was a 5-year. So right now, as we are moving and using those assets, replacing them, it's coming from reserves. So as the adjustments you're referring to are based on the activity within that 10-year capital plan.
Okay. So I'm close, but not quite. Okay. A second group was the numbers go up and down, and that would include election reserves, fire vehicles, public works equipment, recreation, MNR, aggregate, and my theory on that one was that the contributions are defined, and there's been withdrawals defined, so you've penciled in what those numbers going up and down.
Okay, so the difference between the first question and the second one. The first one is really relies on the withdrawals and contributions that are unknown, is because that is based on depending on what reserve type we were looking at. So the surplus and the working reserves are more for our cash flow, any surplus tax stabilization that we may not know at this time. Where this particular question you're asking is actually we know based on the 10-year capital plan. And that's why we see the reserves going up and down, because we have the transfers to reserves based on the budget and the 10-year capital plan, and what we're expensing on what we're purchasing during those 10 years.
Okay.
Okay.
And the third group is where the numbers only go up. And that would include infrastructure projects, fire building, fire communications, public works buildings, dam rehab, development charges. My theory there was that we know how much we've committed to put in, but we don't know how much we're going to pull out within the next 10 years.
That's correct, because as we're working on the various plans, strat plans, your master plans, your needs studies, they'll all be taken into account as staff look at the vision of council, and then that'll be something going on as we talk about those kind of projects. And where do we want to actually, we know the dam one, there's the need to a new replacement of that dam. So we're putting money away right now because there's not enough funds to be able to afford that right now. So right now, those ones are just keep going up because the expense of the project is so large.
And the last one, there's only 2 of them there, and that's where the numbers only go down. And that's the infrastructure levy and the building department. And I don't know why that is. I didn't
Okay.
have a theory on that one.
So the infrastructure is it's a tax stabilization account. So what we had set it up originally to help with the tax stabilization. But our reserve policy has has somehow changed that format. So instead of just using all our surplus going into that infrastructure, we're giving it back to the various departments to be able to fund their capital purchases, thus seeing that there shouldn't be a huge increase in their tax levy increase for capital, and they'll be able to utilize their reserves once they get it to the right level that they need. And so we're not putting the dollars back into that other infrastructure levy. The building department is based on the permits they're receiving, right? And so right now, we haven't projected into the future how much we're going to keep increasing that reserve or even maintaining. And that's something it's a work in process. So hopefully the building department is able to fund itself, and any excess dollars goes into a reserve. But the idea is, as our building permits, as we keep looking at our building permits and the cost of them, they should fund that department in the end, so that we don't have to use any kind of reserve or levy. Okay?
Thanks. And I realize this is what Marcus calls inside baseball, that only us real nerds are really, really interested in. But transferring to reserves is a huge part of our budget. And anybody that's a taxpayer and wants to look at the budget and they see, well, you're going to spend on this and this and this and this, but then you transfer to reserves, like you're putting $1 million or $2 million away. Why don't you just cut taxes instead of doing that? So thanks for the explanation of why this is important now, and as the years go by, it gets more and more important, because, there's lots of municipalities that have infrastructure that's 100 years old and has never been addressed and is causing disastrous results. So thanks for the information. I know it's technical stuff that maybe almost everybody isn't interested in, but I am, so I'm going to ask the question.
Anyone else? Councillor Stewart.
Yeah, really just a quick comment as a new counselor, and thank you to Diane and staff. I think the way, at least for me, I don't have a baseline to compare this to, but the way it was presented through the entire budget process was in a way that was really helpful, open, and I liked the way that all the staff was a part of the process, so we got to hear directly from them on their vision for not only next year, but the next 10 years. So I just thought overall it was done very, very well.
Anyone else? Brief comment then now, because I want to, Councillor Mitchell's point on the Schedule A is critical to me, because it's so tempting for councils to think about the tax rate in a given year, and that's what residents are going to care about. And that's true. That is the primary thing that residents care about. But the reality is that the tax rate in any given year is largely 90-something% determined by the decisions as to how Schedule A has been funded in the previous 10 to 15 years. That's the reality. Because we don't fund projects in a given year out of the taxes for that year. They're funded out of reserves, they're funded out of debentures in the future, a combination of current, future, and past taxpayers. This schedule here, I totally agree, Paul, inside baseball. But it really needs to become, much better understood by residents, that if this is done irresponsibly, then some council in the future is going to give you a huge tax increase, and their answer is going to be quite rightly, because the council of the day in 2023 screwed this up. Right? That's the reality of it. We have to do this right. This is amazing that we have this now to 10 years, and it's showing us in some cases where we're going to have to take some action in the next few years. I know we're going to be getting those reports from Diane to talk about strategies to bolster some of these, to shift some things around. And that's the real discussion that's going to set those tax rates. Not us deciding in a given year whether we push off a culvert or do or don't replace a piece of playground equipment. It's really done here. What's going to happen in 2031 is going to be 90% decided by what this council does in the next couple of years. I'm not going to be here in 2031 to take the blame or the credit for it, but that doesn't mean it's any less our responsibility to do it right. So I'm really happy with this Schedule A being included, but more importantly, that next 5 years out there, and I'm really looking forward to more years out there, and that we have to really dig into that and get to, that's how you get to stabilizing your taxes, not by having a fund to stabilize it, but by actually planning it out, right? Having an investment strategy, having a financing strategy, and knowing where you're going. I cannot speak highly enough about this methodology, and especially the fact that there are some unanswered questions in it that this council is going to have to wrestle with and answer. But the key thing, I think, is in terms of explaining to residents what this year's tax levy and tax rate is to do this responsibly for the future taxpayer. Their future tax bill, their children's future tax bill is funded by how we appropriately fund this infrastructure going forward. Anybody else wish to speak to this before I read the motion? Moved by Stewart, seconded by Grigg, that report 2023-008 from the Director of Finance be received for information and that Council adopt the 2023 budget bylaw. Councillor Stewart, as the mover, do you wish to speak to it? Deputy Mayor Grigg, as the mover, as the seconder, do you wish to speak to it? Anybody else? All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. I'll just say briefly, because I think Council spoke well to this, especially Councillor Stewart's comments about the way it was presented. I think the budget was different again this year. In reality, Diane's first real budget for us. Last year was kind of just keeping things going, keeping the plate spinning. And I think we received a very different budget. I think I totally agree with your comments about the way it was done, the involvement of staff, the transparency of it, the high level, the focusing us on the high level, long-term things that we need to be focused on. And certainly look forward to more of that in future budgets. I just want to say that I think an 8.15% tax levy increase is certainly not a number that anybody's going to be thrilled about, including myself. But it is a responsible number. I think if you wanted it less than 8.15, Council would have had to have a serious discussion about what services are we going to cut. What's going to not happen for residents to get that lower than 8.15? There's no fluff in this. There's nothing in here that doesn't need to be in here. We know, you know, I certainly know that staff had very robust discussions about this before it even got to council. And I'm confident that 8.15 number is a responsible number in a climate of 6.9% inflation over the year 2022. And to continue to deliver the services that residents want. I'm confident they don't want us to cut money on roads. We hear about that all the time. They don't want us to cut money on fire. We hear about it all the time. They don't want us to cut money on playgrounds. They want us to spend more money on playgrounds. Where's the cut? There's no cut here. This is a responsible budget. When you take the growth out, we're in at 6.72% is what residents are going to see. That's less than the 6.9 inflation that they experienced in 2022. Any tax rate increase that we bring to residents that's less than the inflation that they're seeing in the everyday items they buy, like gas and groceries and all the other things that they do, I think is a responsible budget. So I don't think, you know, 8.15 and 6.72 are numbers anybody's going to dance in the street to. I think on the flip side, we have not made irresponsible cuts to get down to arbitrary low numbers to make people happy in the short term when it's announced that then they're going to later on complain, why am I not getting this? Why isn't this improvement happening that I wanted? So to me, I'm very happy with the budget process that we've undertaken. I think it shows a lot of promise for future budget processes. I totally agree with Councillor Stewart's comments about the involvement of staff and the transparency of the process and the focus on the strategic. And I ultimately think that the result is a very responsible one that continues to deliver the services without cuts that residents want, delivers improvements to some services that residents want those improvements, and responsibly funds the long-term projects that we have to deliver. So overall, I'm very happy and very proud of this budget process that we've gone through, and frankly, more proud of the process than the end result, because I think that is where the real potential is going forward here. Is this process is going to give us the ability to do so much better going forward, and absolutely inside baseball. But that, if you, as you get to understand how budgets happen and how tax rates actually end up getting set, that's the most exciting part here, is the potential to do even better at that going forward. So I can't give enough thanks to staff for the process they went through. This takes, you know, 3-4 months before council even looks at it, and then a few more months while council chews over the whole thing. So minimum of a 6-month process, and I think we've done a very responsible job, that it's a highly defensible budget, that it's going to continue to deliver services residents want, improve some services that they've asked for, and long-term funding for the services in the future, notwithstanding that well, I certainly won't be here in 2031 to take credit for it. Thanks to staff and council for the deliberations, and especially to our new councillors it's a huge task to walk into the room and say, welcome, now you're going to pass a, multi-million-dollar budget. This is Diane, she's the Director of Finance, she'll help you out with that. But I think you did an admirable job. I think you both contributed. You asked good, insightful questions. You drove the debate forward. You framed it. Staff heard your concerns and hopes about budgeting, and those will be reflected in future reports that you see in the short term, but also in the budget that you see next term will be a reflection of what you thought about the budget process that you went through. So that's all I'll have to say on that. As if it wasn't enough. And I have one more thing. Special thanks to Diane again, because coming into any organization that has done something for a long time, it's the way we do it. Certainly you knew coming here that we wanted you to bring your new ideas and your new ways, and certainly you and I have had many conversations about what can we do this, can we do that, what are other ways, what can you tell us, what can you expose us to, and I think we've absolutely had that from you. So thanks on behalf of council for showing us new ways, and please continue to show us new ways, and we can always vote no. But if you don't tell us, we can't even vote yes or no. So please continue to challenge us and push us as to new ways we should consider our finances to deliver for residents. Thank you. And 8.6, Corporate Services Department, A, Report 2023-002 from the Legislative Coordinator, Deputy Clerk regarding Integrity Commissioner and Closed Meeting Investigator appointment. Alicia, is there anything you want to highlight in there?
No, I'll just leave it open to comments and questions.
Questions from council on the report? Moved by Grigg, seconded by Stewart, that report 2023-002 from the Legislative Coordinator, Deputy Clerk be received and filed, and that Robert Swayze be appointed as the Township of Zorra's Integrity Commissioner and Closed Meeting Investigator effective February 1st, 2023, and that the Mayor and Clerk be authorized to execute the necessary agreements related thereto. Anybody wish to speak to that? All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. No correspondence requiring direction. 10, boards and committees. So I do have a motion here to receive and file 10A through D. So first question is, does anybody want to pull any of those out, do anything different other than receive or file with A through D? Okay. Anybody want to speak to any of those then, questions or speak to them before I read the motion? Councillor Mitchell, which one?
A, the
Okay.
letter to the,
multi-use courts one?
no, sorry. B, sorry. The,
County,
Upper
Upper Thames. Okay, thank you.
letter.
Anybody else want to speak to any of the others? Okay, Paul.
Just quick comment, the county needs to update their files. The letters addressed to Ian Wilcox, who retired 2 years ago. And I know we're spoiled here, but
Thank you.
attention to detail.
Anybody else on anything? I'll read the motion. Moved by Stewart, seconded by Grigg, that items 10A through D be received and filed for information purposes only. Anybody wish to speak to that? All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. And 11, information items. So I do have a motion to receive and file A through D. So again, does anybody want to do anything different than receive and file with any of those A through D? Anybody want to speak to any of A through D? Paul, which one? A.
Growth.
Anybody else want to speak to any of the others? Then Paul, 11A.
Okay, so reading through this, and I always find me the most challenging part of the agenda lots of times. But on page 9 of 15 of that report, it was entitled, "The Province Should Consider." In the second and third paragraphs, it makes a point permitting second residence on farms and on farm diversified uses. And to me, that kind of jumped out because that's what we've been doing for the last 2 or 3 years, sometimes against the recommendations of our planning staff. So I was pleased to see that the recommendation is to do a couple of things. Specifically, we've allowed, I think, at least half a dozen second residents on farm. The Goldsby Dairy, which is my favorite new milk supplier, is I remember when they come asking for that. I'm sure there's some others that don't come to mind, but it's nice to see that things that we've been doing for 2 or 3 years now are now being incorporated into what the county is recommending should be done to deal with issues that are, so I just wanted to point that out.
Yeah, and we would be able to do it by right without so much planning if the province approved the county's official plan, which has been with the province for more than 6 months, despite ongoing dialogue between county staff and the province, that it would be approved when it was submitted. If that happened, then a lot of these things would just be much, much, much reduced planning processes for people to go through that in some cases would not even have to come to this council for it to happen. It would be simply a matter of a building permit.
And not only save our staff and ourselves a lot of time and effort, but a lot of time and effort and money for people that want to do these things that we've agreed are practical solutions to a problem.
And which would actually and directly contribute to more homes being built faster.
Marcus,
Or Greg.
you beat me to it. Because I was going to say, so what you're saying... So what you're saying is that it would create efficiencies, remove red tape, and this approval would help build more. Okay.
Excellent point.
Darn, I
Mayor Greg.
had a good one.
That's a strong statement.
Anybody else on any of these before I call the question? Moved by Grigg, seconded by Stewart, that items 11A through D be received and filed for information purposes only. All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. And no unfinished business, no notice of motion. Bylaws. So I got bylaws, items of community interest, no closed and confirmatory, right? We're good? Okay. Moved by Stewart, seconded by Grigg, that bylaws 01-23, 02-23, 03-23, and 04-23 be taken as read a first, second, and third time, and finally passed, and further, that the mayor and clerk are hereby authorized to sign the same and affix the corporate seal thereto. Anybody wish to speak to that? Councillor Mitchell.
I've never done this before, but I'm going to comment on a bylaw. And bylaw D, because I printed this off, Schedule A. That is the most wonderful piece of budgeting information that I've ever seen, because anybody that has a basic knowledge of bookkeeping can look at that and they know what we're spending money on, where we're getting money from, and down at the bottom, why we don't get enough money from other sources that we need to tax people and how much that is. So I printed that off because I'm going to put it in my binder, and whenever I need this information for whatever reason, it's all there. So I didn't say it's earlier when Marcus was praising you, because I wanted to spread the praise out a little bit. This is awesome, and thank you very much.
Anybody else want to speak to a bylaw? since we're doing that. Yeah, it's only the second time I've ever seen it done at any council. First time wasn't as good. Anybody else? All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. And items of community interest in the calendar. Anybody have any items of community interest they want to mention as I go through here? Roma Conference. Deputy Mayor Grigg and myself are traveling on Sunday. You're coming back on Tuesday evening as well, I assume, or afternoon, evening, whatever. Okay. I guess I'll just take this opportunity to encourage, I know Councillor Mitchell's gone in the past, Councillor Stewart, Councillor Finch, to try and fit in your schedule, whether it's Roma or OGRA, or I guess it's just called Good Roads now, Roma or Good Roads or AMO. Try and fit, one of those in your calendar a year if you can. You'll find them absolutely invaluable. This year, the warden had an email sent to all councillors in Oxford County to try and meet up and sort of build some political culture in Oxford County, not talking about advancing the business of the council, but informally on the Sunday evening. So there's formal learning there, but there's also like informal opportunities to make connections with people and learn other things, and try and advance policy issues. So just, I really encourage you to look for opportunities to go to those conferences over the year. I'm not seeing anything else in the calendar right now. Oh, Tuesday the 31st, there's another strat plan public meeting in the Embrook Community Center at 7 o'clock. And then we're back here on the 1st. I think that's what I'm seeing. Am I missing anything? Paul?
Monday, the 30th, is the Embro Dam Public Information Center
Yeah.
at Embro. It runs from 4 till 7.
Do we, 4 till 7?
Yeah.
Okay, I
So
emailed
I
them to
think
ask,
it's
because I think the communication that I saw said a date but didn't say a time.
I got something.
You got inside info.
Something somewhere.
Okay.
I'd have to check where. And the other thing is the next day, Tuesday, January 31st, 9:30 a.m., Upper Thames Board orientation meeting in person
Nice.
at the center. So I'm looking forward. I've had a bit of correspondence with some of the new members. I'm looking forward to meeting the new members.
Anyone else? Any other items of community interest? Looking ahead a little bit to, because I saw it yesterday, the Chelmsford Lions are putting on their Family Day event on the, whatever it is, 20th. Monday the 20th, I think it is. It starts at 11. I don't know what time it's done at, but anyway, just to look ahead there on that. Anything else before we move on from the calendar? Items of community interest? All right. Then, moved by Grigg, seconded by Stewart, that bylaw 05-23, being a bylaw to confirm the proceedings of council held January 18th, 2023, be read a first, second, and third time this January 18th, 2023, and further that the mayor and clerk are hereby authorized to sign the same and affix the corporate seal thereto. Does anybody wish to speak to the confirmatory bylaw? All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. And moved by Stewart, seconded by Greg, that this session of council be now adjourned and herewith closed at 11:41 a.m. And the next meeting of council be called for February 1st, 2023 at 9:30 a.m. in the council chambers at the Township Municipal Office. Any discussion? All those in favor?